The conversation around AI risk management is no longer a philosophical debate. As we approach aggressive enforcement deadlines, the global market is forcing a rapid transition toward hard professionalization, with structural requirements finally locking into place. The problem isn't a lack of rules. Most enterprises have already drafted comprehensive, well-documented ethics policies. What they completely lack are the mechanical workflows to actually execute them. Across the governance community, this is the single most recurring point of frustration. Risk professionals are finding themselves trapped in organizations that possess broad ethical guidelines, but absolutely zero operational assurance programs to back them up. This S-curve chart maps organizational capability over time, and it highlights exactly where deployments fail. We define this systemic stall as the policy-to-practice gap. It is the exact point where capability hits a wall, acting as a massive bottleneck. To cross this chasm, organizations are desperate for execution middleware to bridge the gap and resume deployment. The dominant vendor in this space will not be the one that authors yet another theoretical framework. The winner will be the entity that makes our existing frameworks strictly executable. Translating a static policy document into a series of automated operational workflows has become the most lucrative opportunity in the current ecosystem. Ultimately, possessing an AI ethics mandate without the operational middleware to run it is functionally equivalent to having no policy at all, because it leaves the enterprise fully exposed. To solve this execution problem, enterprises are rapidly abandoning fragmented, localized regulations in favor of global structural solutions. We are seeing aggressive standardization. Professionals are aligning around a specific dual compliance baseline, and they are doing so regardless of their geographical jurisdiction. This convergence is built on two specific foundations. As shown here, the NIST AI Risk Management Framework serves as the voluntary structural standard, while the EU AI Act acts as the penalizing enforcement mechanism. Any internal tooling, compliance software, or training program that fails to firmly anchor to these two specific frameworks will rapidly lose market share. Constructed directly on top of this dual baseline is an organizational structure known as the Three Lines of Defense, or 3LOD. Borrowed directly from financial risk management, this is the new default corporate architecture for AI governance. The first line of defense consists of the operational management and engineering teams. These are the developers actively building, tuning, and deploying AI systems on a daily basis. The second line of defense is a dedicated risk management and compliance function. This layer oversees the first line, actively governing the outputs of the engineers to ensure strict policy alignment. The third line of defense is the independent internal audit function. They sit entirely outside the development loop, providing objective, unvarnished assurance directly to the board of directors. Adopting this 3LOD architecture and layering it over the NIST and EU AI Act baseline is no longer an optional best practice. It is the absolute minimum structural blueprint required for an enterprise to survive in this regulatory climate. Yet, despite its perfection on a whiteboard, this meticulously designed enterprise architecture is actively failing when deployed in the real world. The primary point of structural failure is a severe talent bottleneck. Organizations need skilled AI governance professionals significantly faster than the market can produce them. This absolute scarcity has driven massive compensation premiums.
Specialized governance rules are now consistently demanding salaries exceeding $250,000. Enterprises cannot simply hire their way out of this risk. The lack of qualified personnel means critical nodes in that three lines of defense structure remain completely empty. This staffing shortage is heavily compounded by a shift in the nature of the threats. Legacy technical risks, like static algorithmic bias found in training data, are being eclipsed by a new generation of continuous dynamic threats. The most critical emerging vulnerability is shadow AI. This is the unauthorized, undocumented internal use of generative AI tools by employees, and it completely bypasses the established governance architecture. Because dynamic threats like shadow AI and model drift happen instantaneously, they require real-time continuous monitoring. This breaks the utility of traditional point-in-time audit schedules. There is one final systemic failure in the current market. These regulatory frameworks contain a massive enterprise bias. Open source developers, startups, and small to medium enterprises are functionally excluded from compliance. They simply lack the enormous capital and headcount required to staff a dedicated 3 lines of defense structure. Until the 3LOD model is automated to handle continuous threats and scaled down to be affordable for SMEs, the global AI ecosystem remains structurally compromised. These exact market vulnerabilities create immediate, highly lucrative first-mover advantages for organizations willing to execute actionable solutions. For product builders, the core imperative is clear. Stop creating new theoretical frameworks. Focus exclusively on engineering automated execution engines that operationalize existing policies. Specifically, shadow AI detection and real-time model monitoring currently represent the single most critical unmet wedge feature demanded by enterprise buyers today. Builders must also develop lightweight governance-as-a-service tooling. Scaled properly, there is an entirely underserved SME and open-source market waiting to be captured. For human resources strategy, enterprise leaders must stop competing in the inflated $250,000 external hiring war. It is an inefficient allocation of capital. Instead, redirect that budget toward rapidly upskilling your existing internal compliance teams through targeted, globally recognized certifications like the IAPP AIGP. Concurrently, organizations should immediately create hybrid internal roles. Fusing machine learning engineers with risk analysts eliminates the silos between technical execution and regulatory policy. Looking at this visual breakdown of global resources, we see a massive unexploited void. As regions worldwide face mandatory EU AI Act compliance, the sheer lack of localized governance content for non-Anglophone regions, particularly Arabic and Mandarin markets, leaves those sectors wide open. To capture that attention through thought leadership, prioritize authentic, practitioner-led implementation case studies. Real-world execution stories are generating vastly more market engagement than vendor-led theory. These strategic moves, building execution tooling, upskilling internal talent, and localizing content, must be aggressively aligned with the impending 2026 EU AI Act enforcement deadlines. These hard regulatory deadlines act as an aggressive market-forcing mechanism. They are actively transitioning the entire industry from a state of voluntary adoption to one of mandatory execution. The window to establish industry-standard implementation tooling and talent pipelines is closing rapidly. The organizations that architect the operational blueprint today will dominate the next decade of AI risk management.